Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today I'm sitting down with romance author Kate Clayborn, who wrote the new book, Georgie All Along. I absolutely loved getting to chat with Kate about this book. I loved getting to learn more about the beginning of her career, how she created the story, the inspo behind these characters, and of course, how she executed one of the best dual POV romances I've read in a really long time. This was such a special chat. I had the most fun chatting with her. I wish I could have chatted with her for like another 30 minutes and kept picking her brain. But this is a really great episode. I hope you all love it. So without further ado, my conversation with romance author Kate Clayborn starts right now. Welcome, Kate, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I loved your book, Georgie All Along, so I can't wait to get to chat with you about it. But I first would just love to get into like the background of your writing career and kind of how all this started, because I know this is not your first published book.
It is not. I think Georgie is my 7th. I think.
Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So tell me, a little bit about like the beginning of your career and maybe how we got to this point.
Yeah. So I started reading romance I think later than a lot of my friends in the industry. So I was like in my 20s and I had started my first full-time job, my first like kind of grown-up job.
Yeah.
And I had also I had moved somewhere new for that job. And I just was like, you know how it is, like you move to a new place. It's like very hard to make friends as an adult. Yes. It was like a very lonely time. So I kind of did what I always do, which is like, I just sort of turned to books.
Yes.
And it was like, I happened to go to the library. I picked a book that looked good to me. And part of the reason I picked it, I've said this other places before, but part of the reason I picked it is because the author was from Ohio, which is where I grew up. And I was like homesick.
Okay. Fair.
And that turned out to be a Jennifer Cruzy book. It was a romance novel. And
Which one?
It was Bet Me.
Of course it was.
Yes.
Great book.
That was my first romance novel. And I just was like, well, this is freaking great.
Yeah.
And I just read and read so many romances in that like span of time. And I just like sometime around there, I started to think like I had always loved writing, but never thought about like doing it professionally. But I sort of thought, I think this is it. Like, I think if I ever tried to write professionally, I think this is what I should be doing, just because I really had felt that romance had sort of saved me in a lot of ways. It, made me feel very connected to the world and connected to myself. And I wanted to like make other people feel the way romance made me feel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I tried it. And I just was really, really fortunate that when I finished Beginner's Luck, which was my first published book, I was very lucky that my agent sort of found me in the slush pile and called. And the rest from there is history.
So have you been working with the same like agent and then publisher this entire time for all 7 books?
I have. I've stayed. My agent, Taylor Haggerty, is at Root Literary, and I've been with her since the very beginning. And my first contract was with Kensington, and all of my books since then have been with Kensington.
That's incredible. So how does it work? Like when you write one book and then it's ready to go, like, are they like knocking on your door right away? Like, okay, give me the next one. Like because I know you have so many under your belt. So what's that like trying to like kind of have like a rollout of books constantly?
Well, my first books were, it was a 3-book series. And I remember the deadlines in between those were like, I think that they were like 6 to 9 months apart, the deadlines. Initially, like when I sold that trilogy of books, I had Beginner's Luck done. And the second one, I think, was halfway done when I sold the contract. So I was actually like, at the time, I was like, oh, like, this isn't too bad. Like,
right.
But that was because I had a book and a half done.
Right.
Then I realized, like, oh, it actually takes me a bit longer to write a book. So yeah, I think like usually you're signing contracts for like since that first trilogy, it's been 2 books at a time.
Okay.
And so, and I've tried to do it so that I have like about a year between when I finish one and when the next one is due.
Okay.
Which is like, to me, that still feels fast, but I think I'm a pretty slow writer compared to a lot of people in the genre. But I don't know. I think romance, we're a productive group of writers. We write quickly.
For real.
So
For real.
I feel slow, but I think, you know,
in the grand scheme of things.
The romance standard might be.
Exactly. A little skewed. Fair enough. Yeah. This book in particular, your new book, Georgie All Along, it got so much buzz before and after its launch. Like, it was just named so many different people's like favorite books. It was on all of these lists. Like, what was that reception like, I guess, both before and after the book had come out?
You know, it was really incredible and exciting. I think when I was writing Georgie, I was trying a lot of new things for me as a writer, and I felt excited and I was hopeful that people would, particularly at this time, that people would connect with Georgie. Mm-hmm. So like when it first started to make its way out into the world and people were loving it, I was really, really excited. But then I think one thing that was really different was that my previous 2 paperbacks had released kind of during the pandemic. Like Love Lettering came out and the pandemic hit, I think, a month after, and Love at First came out during the pandemic. And so, you know, I hadn't had a book release where I had any like events or so this felt really different, and it was so exciting. Like it was an exciting way to get to connect with readers and get to talk about the book. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've been amazed and so honored. Yeah.
The book has really been everywhere. And at first I was like, wait, what is this book with the yellow cover? Like what, what is this book that everybody's reading? But it's just been amazing to see like its legs and how it's continuing to like make it onto these people's lists, and people are still talking about it. Like when you were doing those book tours and talking to people, like what were readers most connecting with in this story? Like what was the biggest piece of feedback maybe you got?
I think probably the first thing that I would often hear about is just like how much people loved Levi. And how Levi was sort of like a book boyfriend for a lot of readers, which is a huge, that's a huge honor when you're a romance writer. And then I also think, I did hear a lot of people say what I hoped people would feel about the book, which is that they felt connected to Georgie, even if they didn't feel similar to her in personality. They felt like they connected with kind of like the crisis of confidence that she was going through. And I think, that was my intention. I wrote it because I was thinking about, I don't know, the last 3 years that all of us have been through and the feelings it's brought up for a lot of us. And I've been so excited that people have connected with her.
I love that. I would love to talk more about both of those characters. But before we go any further, I'm wondering if you could provide everyone who's listening with a brief little synopsis about what Georgie is about.
Yeah. So Georgie Mulcahy is a Hollywood PA, an assistant to a very famous director. And that director sort of suddenly decides to retire. And so without this job that has kept her kind of on a treadmill for the last several years, she feels really adrift. She has the opportunity to go back to her very small hometown, where her best friend is getting ready to have a baby. And so she decides she'll go home, and if she can't help herself, she'll help her best friend. Mm-hmm. And when she gets there, she and her best friend find this old journal that they used to keep together. And the journal becomes kind of like sort of a bucket list for Georgie of things that she never did in high school. And Georgie sort of has this sense that if she could reclaim that person that she was back then, maybe she'd have a better sense of who she is now. And in that journal, there's like, she had this obsessive crush on the sort of town golden boy. But instead of meeting the town golden boy when she's back home, she meets his older brother, who is the town hermit and one time town rebel. And so that's Levi. And this is a romance, so they fall in love.
Yeah. I need to know like how you came up with the premise of this book. Like what was the inspo for the actual story before we talk about Georgie and Levi as characters?
Yeah, so the inspiration was the fic or the journal that Georgie finds. I used to keep a journal like this with two of my friends. We would like exchange it back and forth and write to each other in sort of a different way than Belle and Georgie do. But I had been thinking in my own life, you know, like obviously during the pandemic, so many of us spent a lot of time at home. We were like maybe doing projects around our house. And I was like thinking about all these sort of souvenirs from my past I was coming across. And I think the inspiration for the book was just this idea of like, when you come across like a souvenir of your past self, how it makes you feel and how it makes you rethink the way you ended up. And so that was kind of like the starting point for the book. And I wanted to think about that and like reputation and how that shapes the way we feel about ourselves into adulthood. So,
and I guess that's a great segue into Georgie's character and kind of this crisis she's facing in this book and this sort of sense of self and identity and kind of wondering where she maybe went wrong or how she can improve herself or just being kind of unsure in herself. And I feel like that's such like a common thread now, especially for people who this book is targeted to, like this like young adult, new adult type of generation. So I'm just curious, like, what was that outlining process like to create Georgie? Like, how did you kind of build her and what kind of inspiration from your own experience or other experiences that maybe you heard of did you put into like craft her as a character?
Yeah, big part of how I crafted Georgie. I mean, well, I will say like anytime I'm crafting characters, no matter who they are, I'm always like thinking very in depth about everything from like their likes and dislikes to, you know, their past, I'm trying to like make them feel as real as possible on page. But for Georgie specifically, I really spent a lot of time getting to know her because on the surface, I didn't feel like I had a lot in common with her. It's like, I'm a very type A person. I like to be very organized and I like to know the plan. And Georgie is really, she's a little bit more chaotic. And I guess like one way I crafted her was I thought a lot about like all the things I fear or the things that make me uncomfortable about myself, right? Like, I always want to try to have a plan. And when I don't, I'm fearful. Right. So I wanted to like lean in and create a character who thought about the world differently than I did. Because I think that, the things in Georgie that are maybe like most scary to me are also the things I, need to embrace a little bit more as a person.
Okay.
You know, so that it was like I learned a lot from her, I think, as I was writing her. Yeah.
Amazing. And then I guess on the flip, there's Levi. That's like literally the most amazing book boyfriend, to your credit and to what you just said. Like everyone, I feel when that book was coming out, everyone was just like, Levi, like that's the takeaway from this book. Like, where did his inspiration come from? Like, he's just such a perfect hero and he's like everything Georgie needs. Like, how did you come up with him as a being?
Yeah, I wanted him to be like, of course, a theme of the book is that, you know, when you meet Georgie, like she thinks of herself as a mess, and a lot of people around her look at her and think of her as a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But a theme of the book really is that like kind of everybody is a mess,
Exactly.
in one way or another. But Levi, like outwardly, he has worked so hard to contain his mess and like not show it to anyone, because he's really never been taught that it's okay to be imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
Or he's been taught to sort of be ashamed of his mistakes. So I wanted him to be kind of a stabilizing force in one sense in the book, but also that when he's with Georgie, he allows himself to be
Mm-hmm.
a little less stable, a little less perfect. And I think the key for me, like I know a lot of readers have talked about this character as well, but like a key for writing Levi to me was writing Hank, like writing his dog.
Yeah. Best part.
I always knew Levi was going to be a dog dad.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew he was going to be a dog dad to like a rescued pit bull, like a dog that people might see and assume the worst of.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the way he thinks about Hank, the way he takes care of Hank,
Mm-hmm.
the way Hank takes care of him, it was like how I understood Levi as a character in a lot of ways.
And another part of this book, and I guess it's both about Georgie and Levi, is how it's written in a dual POV. And those are my favorite types of romance books to read because I love getting into both characters' heads. But I imagine that's like not an easy thing to write. Like I feel like that's like a challenging literary technique to execute properly because you need to ensure that like both characters are well-rounded and well thought out, and then figure out how you want to move the story along from both characters' point of view. What was that like, and how come you came to the decision to write this story in that way?
Yeah, I like you. I often really like favor a book with both points of view. I mean, like there's exceptions, right? Like books I love that are single point of view, but I often really like it too. And the other kind of layer to this is that with Georgie and Levi, I wrote in like first person dual point of view. So a huge part of it for me was like making sure I got their voices right. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time, like when I was just starting to draft the book, just thinking about how they talked and how they talked differently from one another, and like the way they saw the world and how that was different. So like, you know, when you're in Levi's point of view, he often kind of like the images in his head are connected to like the water or the outside, right? Because that's very important to him as a character. So some of it is like getting the voice right. And then to your point about the pacing, I always just try to think about like, this is advice I got from Sarah MacLean, a great romance writer. But one of the things she talks about is that when you're switching point of view, you want to make sure you are in the point of view of the character who like has the most at stake in that scene. So one of the things I try to think about as I'm like pacing the story is like, whose point of view does this need to be in? Because that person has the most at risk here, or is going to have like is going to have the most emotion in this scene. That's whose point of view I want it to be in.
That's so interesting. I've never heard it talked about. Like, I've never heard the differentiation of the POV and like kind of determining what plot lines to put where.
Yeah.
That like outlook, which is actually, now it makes me want to reread this book. Like, thinking of that and like how you intentionally broke it up. Because as a reader, again, back to what you had just said about the voice, like I obviously read a ton of romance books, and I'm someone that's like, if I read a book by an author and I love them, like I'm going to keep reading all of their books. And some things I've noticed about some authors is that their voice remains the same throughout all of their books. So I sometimes have an issue, or like I catch myself like slipping into older books because I'm just thinking of the same voice.
Yeah.
And I find that sometimes when I read dual POV books, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, which chapter am I in now? Like I kind of forget. But in this case, it was so clear because they were so distinct. Was that when you were outlining it, were you kind of like at the very beginning, were you kind of like making a checklist of like, these are things that are going to be like for Georgie and these are things that are kind of going to be for Levi? Like, how did you at the very beginning, or were they always very, very clear to you, very different? It was always very obvious for you.
In terms of like the character voices, like I knew they would sound different and I knew they would think different, but it took me practice to like get the voices just right. So like, this is like very, this is probably boring. So just like stop me if it's boring.
No, I love talking about this.
But like Georgie, often like the sentences are a little longer in Georgie's point of view because she's a little bit more of like a winding thinker, right? And Levi's are a little bit more clipped. Georgie, like when you're in Levi's point of view, the images tend to be a little more concrete than in Georgie's point of view. So like I tried to think about like stylistic things that would distinguish them, but also they speak differently. Like Levi has lived in this small Southern hometown for his whole life, whereas Georgie has spent the last 10 years away from this town. So her like the way she speaks sounds a little different. Levi has more of a drawl. So I mean, I spend a lot of time making sure that you could tell the difference in their voices. And that was actually like really exciting for me recently when the audiobook came out and I got to listen to the two narrators. And I think they did a great job like capturing it. But I also I did plot in such a way that I knew I wanted to be in Levi's point of view for most of the scene where he kind of I don't know if you remember when they run into his siblings.
Yes.
I knew that I needed to be in his point of view pretty much right after that. Like it's okay if Georgie runs into them, but basically the point of view has to switch there. You have to be in Levi's head when he kind of sees his brother and sister there for the first time in so long. So there were moments like that where I knew from the beginning, this has got to be in Levi's point of view or Georgie's point of view.
And in the editing process, did you have to shift things around ever? You're like, actually, this doesn't work. What was that like when you were kind of going through it again, or first pass, you kind of got it?
I got it. I think I got it on the first pass, but I want to say that my writing process is pretty recursive. So I'm not very good at fast drafting. So if something is, I hear writers talk about, and I'm very envious, they'll talk about sort of they just keep going and know they can fix it in revisions. But if I know something isn't working, I can't keep going. I have to keep going back. So usually point of view is that's one of the things that's very nailed down by the time the book goes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another part of the story that I really loved is obviously Belle and Georgie's relationship. And I feel like I just haven't seen or read rather such strong female friendships on the page, especially in romance books. I find that whenever there's a friend, it's just a fluff added character and there's no real substance to that storyline, or I just love how this is kind of a story of them also within this book. What was that like to add her character, and kind of why did you want to have that part of this story in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I really love, I personally love reading romance where there are a lot of different types of relationships on page. Every once in a while I also like those very tightly focused romances where it's just two people sort of in a box and they, but I do gravitate toward romances where there's a lot of different relationships on the page. And I really like writing friendship because I think friendship is as complex, if not more complex than romantic relationships are. And I also think friendship between women can be very special, particularly because I think women rely on each other in friendship in a very particular way. And the bonds are very complicated, particularly ones that have lasted a long time. And in this book, especially, I wanted to write, it was like my goal to write childhood best friends. I'm very lucky to have a childhood best friend. And like that friendship is so uniquely constructed because we've known each other through all these phases of our lives.
Yeah.
And since the book in some sense is about reputation and like, you know, how we grow up, it's kind of important for me to think about like those friends that you've had since you were a kid. They kind of know all the skeletons in your closet. Yes. They know like all the different personalities you've tried on. And I think Belle and Georgie, it's beautiful that they on the surface don't have a whole lot in common, but like on a soul level, they understand each other and just love each other unconditionally. And I don't know, that's so special to me. That makes romance feel complete when people have those connections.
I feel like I read this book at the perfect time because I'm currently back in my childhood bedroom, back at my parents' house. And the reason why I'm here is because my oldest and bestest friend just had a baby. So I literally came home to be here. Yeah.
So you're Georgie.
Exactly. So when I was reading it, I was like, this is hitting so, I mean, I'm engaged and I'm not like looking for love right now, but like, I was like, this part of the story hits so close to home because I could totally see me and my best friend and Georgie and Belle. So it just like was the perfect time.
Oh,
I feel like
so special.
Yeah, so special. And this book obviously been on my list for so long. And I've been trying to like set up a time for us to connect. And you had such like a busy launch time. And I'm just happy like I waited till now to do it because it like lined up so perfectly with my actual.
That is perfect.
Life. Yeah.
Go have your fiance buy you a strawberry milkshake.
Oh my gosh. He owes me one, honestly. But there was so much of this book that I love that I'm taking with me. And I'm just like so excited that now everyone else is like, I'm in on the secret because I feel like I came late to this book, but I know everyone wants to know, like, what are you working on next? Like, I know you've written a bunch of like series, story world stuff. Like, is there another book coming in this world, or are you working on something? Can you even share? Like, I don't even know what you're
on. So I just finished and turned in another book. And it's another standalone. So it's not connected to Georgie, but like in terms of would I ever revisit these characters again? Like I would. I mean, never say never, right?
Yeah.
But I just turned in something new. And it'll be out, I think a little under a year now.
Okay, exciting.
And the title of it, it's, I think I'm allowed to say the title. It's The Other Side of Disappearing. And
intriguing.
Yes. And it is the first time I've ever written a road trip romance. And I love it. Like I'm working on copy edits for it now. And I'm just amazing. I fall in love with it more on every page. So I'm really excited about it.
That's so exciting. Can you like tease like tropes that are included, or is that giving away too much?
I mean, I can say, I think all I can say right now is the road trip part.
Okay, fair.
I don't want to get in trouble.
No. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm just like curious. I'm curious, Georgie over here right now. So I just want to know.
That's perfect. All in your hometown, being curious, being chaotic.
Exactly. I'm just living my Georgie life. Okay, well, this was so much fun. Thank you for taking time to chat with me. I like loved picking your brain about the dual POV of it all because I found that it was like so well executed, and I love when I can chat with an author that has like a different take or strategy into writing them. So this was really refreshing. So I appreciate your insight.
Well, I love talking to you too. And you asked such great questions, and thank you so much for having me. And thanks to all your listeners too.